Rain tapped softly against the windows of the small house in Oregon, the kind of rain that made everything feel heavier and quieter at the same time. Emily Carter sat alone in the living room, the lamp beside her glowing warm against the gray. Evenings since Mark had passed away months ago, silence had become her constant companion. The house no longer carried his laughter, his footsteps, or the smell of his coffee in the mornings. It only carried memories. Emily tried to stay strong, but some nights felt longer than others, and this was one of them. Jason stood in the hallway, watching her for a moment before speaking. He had grown taller in the last year, his face sharper, but grief had aged him more than time ever could. College stress, mixed with the pain of losing his father, had left him restless and tired. He rubbed his neck, trying to ease the tension that never seemed to leave his shoulders. His doctor had said stress could settle in the body like a heavy weight, and Jason felt that weight every day. "Emily," he said quietly. She looked up, offering a tired but kind smile. "Yes, Jason, my shoulders are killing me," he said, stepping closer. "Dad used to help when they hurt like this. I don't really know who else to ask." The words weren't dramatic, just honest. Emily's heart softened. She could hear how much he missed his father in that simple sentence. She patted the couch beside her. "Come sit." Jason lowered himself slowly, his body stiff with tension. Emily stood behind him and gently placed her hands on his shoulders. They were tight like stone. She pressed slowly, carefully, the way she used to rub Mark's shoulders after long work days. Jason let out a deep breath. He didn't realize he had been holding for a moment. Everything felt normal again. The rain, the soft music playing from her phone, the steady rhythm of her hands moving across his shoulders. It was quiet, calm, almost peaceful. Jason's breathing slowed. The pain began to ease. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't have to thank me," Emily said softly. "You've been carrying too much." As her hands moved, she could feel how thin he had become, how stress had taken away his strength. It made her ache inside. She knew grief could break people slowly if they didn't feel supported. Minutes passed. Then Jason spoke again, his voice low, almost shaking. "Emily, can I ask you something?" Her hands paused but stayed on his shoulders. "Of course. I don't want to feel alone anymore." The words hung in the air. Emily felt her chest tighten. She understood loneliness all too well. Nights crying into pillows, waking up reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore, eating meals in silence. Loneliness wasn't just being alone. It was feeling forgotten. Jason turned slightly, looking back at her. His eyes were glossy. "Since Dad died, everything feels empty," he said. "College feels pointless. Friends don't understand. They still have their families. They still laugh like nothing changed." Emily slowly pulled her hands away and moved to sit beside him. "I try to be strong," Jason continued. "But sometimes I just feel like I'm drowning." She listened, her heart breaking for him. "You're not drowning," she said gently. "You're grieving, I know," he said, shaking his head. "But grief hurts more when you carry it alone." Ah! The rain outside grew louder, like it was listening. Jason looked down at his hands. "When you touched my shoulders just now, it felt like someone cared again, like home." Emily swallowed hard. She hadn't realized how much comfort he had been holding inside. "You've always cared about me," he said softly. "Even when Dad got sick. Even after he died." "Stayed? Of course I stayed," she replied. "You're my family. But sometimes it feels like more than that," he said quietly. "I don't know how to explain it." Emily felt her heartbeat quicken, not from fear but from surprise. "Jason," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "grief can confuse feelings. It makes the heart search for safety." He nodded, tears falling. "I'm not trying to make things weird," he said quickly. "I just don't want to feel invisible." "You're not invisible," she said, placing her hand gently on his arm. "Not to me. The pain in his face softened a little. "I miss him so much," Jason whispered. "I miss his voice. I miss the way he'd say everything would be okay." Emily felt tears rise in her own eyes. "I miss him too," she said, "every day." They sat there together, sharing the same ache. The massage had started as a simple moment of care, but it had opened the door to emotions both of them had been hiding. Outside, thunder rolled softly in the distance. Inside, two broken hearts tried to find comfort in the quiet. Neither of them knew yet that this night would change their relationship forever. Not in the way Jason feared, but in a way that would shape their healing. For now, all they had was the rain, the silence, and the deep need to not feel alone anymore. The night stretched on, quiet except for the steady sound of rain against the window. Laura and Ethan lay on opposite sides of the bed, but the stillness no longer felt awkward, felt like a bridge. Fragile, yet real, connecting the distance that had grown between them over the years. For the first time in a long time, they weren't distracted by work, school, or obligations. There were no phones buzzing, no emails demanding attention, just the sound of breathing and the soft tapping of rain. Laura turned her head slightly toward Ethan and spoke, her voice low but steady. "I miss you." Ethan froze for a moment as if he hadn't expected the words, though he had felt them too. "I miss you too, Mom," he replied softly. The words hung in the air, filling the room with something both heavy and light. Neither of them spoke for a few minutes after that, letting the silence carry the weight of unspoken feelings. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was necessary. It was the silence of two people who had lived side by side for years, yet never truly spoken about the things that mattered most. Finally, Ethan broke the quiet, his voice barely above a whisper. "College changed everything." He didn't elaborate, but Laura knew. She knew the long nights when he didn't call home, the time she had waited by the phone. The distance that grew without either of them noticing how far apart they had drifted. Laura felt a pang of guilt mixed with longing. "I thought I was giving you space," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "But maybe I was letting you drift away." Ethan turned toward her, the dim lamp casting shadows across his face. "I didn't drift. I just didn't know how to come back," he said, and his words struck a chord deep inside Laura. It wasn't a confession of regret. Not exactly, but an acknowledgement of the years that had passed without real connection. Tears formed in Laura's eyes, unbidden, and she swallowed hard to keep them from falling. There was no anger, no blame, just a quiet recognition of time lost. They began to talk then, hesitantly at first, about everything they hadn't discussed in months, even years. Ethan spoke about the pressures of college life, the constant need to perform, the stress that made him feel small despite his accomplishments. Laura shared her own struggles after the divorce, a loneliness that crept into her evenings, the quiet of a house that had once been full of laughter, the fear that she had somehow failed at keeping her family connected. Their words flowed slowly, deliberately, as though each one had been waiting years to be said aloud. At some point, Ethan reached across the bed, not to touch, but to be near, to close the invisible gap between them. "You were always my safe place," he said. His voice carried the weight of memory of every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every time he had fallen and she had been there to pick him up. Laura felt a lump in her throat, a mix of pride, sorrow, and a deep, abiding love. "And you were my whole world," she whispered back, her voice trembling. There was no need for physical closeness. Their hearts had already reached across the space between them. The conversation shifted naturally, moving to lighter topics, memories from his childhood, vacations they had taken together, funny incidents at school. But even in laughter, there was a softness, a tenderness that made the bond feel renewed. Every story, every shared memory reminded them that their relationship was not lost, only paused. The room felt warmer, as if the shared words had cast a gentle light over every corner, dispelling the cold weight of years apart. Ethan admitted that he had often felt guilty for leaving, for not calling more often, for prioritizing work and social life over family. Laura reassured him, her words steady. You grew up. You needed to find your own path. It was true, but the acknowledgement also carried relief. They both recognized that the distance had not been about failure, but about life's natural flow. Their reconnection was not about fixing the past, it was about embracing the present. Hours passed and the rain continued outside, soft and constant. Laura noticed how much Ethan had changed. How he carried himself with quiet confidence, yet still had the same warmth in his eyes that she remembered as a child. Ethan noticed the lines on her face, the way she smiled despite the weight she carried, the way her hands moved as she talked. They noticed each other again in a way that was patient, unhurried, and deeply human. They talked about their fears too, the fear that life would pull them apart again, the fear that moments like this were fleeting. That they spoke with honesty, acknowledging that they had control over the effort to stay connected, even if life's demands sometimes got in the way. I don't want us to lose this again, Ethan said quietly. His voice carried a seriousness that made Laura nod in agreement. Neither do I, she replied, her own voice steady and firm. The room grew darker as the night deepened. Shadows moved gently across the ceiling, and the city lights outside flickered faintly through the rain-streaked window. Laura realized that in the quiet of this hotel room something important had shifted. It wasn't about romance or desire. It was about the deeper, enduring love between a mother and her grown son. It was about connection, understanding, and the healing that comes from truly seeing and being seen by someone you love. Ethan finally settled back against the pillows, a quiet sigh escaping his lips. Laura lay on her side, her arm resting gently on the covers, feeling the subtle rise and fall of his breathing. It was a moment suspended in time, one they both knew would shape the way they related to each other from now on. Neither slept for long that night, not because of discomfort, but because their hearts were awake, processing years of distance, reconnecting with honesty and care. Outside, the storm continued its soft percussion, but inside, the tension and distance of the past years had begun to dissolve. Words had bridged the gap, laughter had lightened the space, and quiet admissions had laid the groundwork for a bond. Renewed. In that small hotel room, Laura and Ethan found a closeness they hadn't realized they had missed. It was gentle, unspoken in some ways, but profound. They were together, not just physically, but emotionally, fully and safely. By the time dawn began to hint at the sky, their hearts were lighter. The room no longer felt like a temporary space, a place to wait out a storm. It had become a place of healing, a place where they could rediscover each other in a way that was safe, nurturing, and deeply meaningful. Laura realized that moments like this, unexpected, unplanned, yet full of quiet beauty, were rare. She made a silent promise to herself to hold on to this connection, to nurture it even when life tried to pull them apart again. And as the first faint light of morning filtered through the window, both of them drifted into a light, uneasy sleep, comforted by the knowledge that, for the first time in a long while, they had truly found each other again. It was not dramatic or loud, but it was real, emotional, and powerful. The night had been long, but it had given them something far more valuable than comfort or warmth. It had given them reconnection, understanding, and the quiet promise of a bond renewed.